everyone, so happy Pride Month. A special happy Pride Month from St. Paul's. Also happy Diversity Month from St. Paul's as well. The month we celebrate all kinds of diversity. So in order to celebrate these, we need to talk about certain issues such as the LGBT community. So recently, several laws have been passed that affect LGBT individuals. In states like Tennessee, Texas, Florida, to name a few. So for the sake of transparency, I feel like I should kind of say my personal stake in this. I am a lesbian. I am a member of St. Paul's from the Episcopal Church, which has very pro-LGBT positions. So again, I always feel like it's important to state your biases. You can determine where to take the information from, given that. Okay, so on to the presentation. I've read several articles and I tend to agree with them that this Pride Month feels a little different. Passages of these laws, people really kind of taking stock about LGBT oppression, LGBT issues. So this really becomes noticeable when you look at the Human Rights Campaign, the larger LGBT organizations. So as of May 2nd, 2023, so this has changed, over 540 anti-LGBTQ plus laws bills have been introduced in state legislature. This is a record. Over 220 bills specifically targeting transgender and non-binary people have been proposed. This is also a record. So 45 anti-LGBTQ laws have been enacted so far this year. So again, certainly quite a bit of discussion has surrounded the LGBTQ plus community. So they deal with certain issues. I want to focus on three of them. First, I want to focus on the banning books, discussions, issues. Then I want to focus on limiting areas where drag shows can be performed. And thirdly, I want to look at transgendered hormones, whether or not minors can receive those hormones. These are very complex issues. Please don't take me as the final authority on any of them. Again, we're going to kind of give a quick rundown of them. So again, if you want more information, by all means, do your own research. This is a starting point, not a final word. So first, I want to look at the Don't Say Gay bill. Certainly a controversial bill that has occurred. So what this bill is ostensibly about is what kind of information parents can receive about their children. If you look at the first two sections of the bill, it actually doesn't deal with LGBTQ issues. It deals with what kind of information parents have a right to receive from schools. So, according to the bill summary found on the Florida Senate website, the bill, Chapter 2022-22 LOF, reinforces a parent's fundamental right to make decisions regarding the care and upbringing of his or her child in the public school setting. The bill requires each district board to adopt procedures for notifying a student's parent there is a change in service or monitoring related to the student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. All procedures adopted under the bill must require school district personnel to encourage a student to discuss issues related to his or her well-being with his or her parent. So basically, this is about the schools trying to communicate better with the parents. There are exceptions made if there was a case of abuse, then the school may decide to do differently, but that's kind of a little bit of a clause. So I don't want to parody everything this bill is. So again, the first two sections of the bill, they deal with health information. One of the ones I found intriguing was sometimes schools will give questionnaires about mental health. For instance, how have you been feeling, things like that. what the Florida law requires is that the school give the questionnaire to the parents beforehand. The parents look at the questionnaire, then they say you can administer this or no, I don't want to administer that. So that's one of them. And there are a few other things that are clarified in the first section. It's the third section that's gotten the most attention. So section 3 of the bill states, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. So again, initially it was K1, K through 3. We'll get into how it expanded a little bit later. But it's fairly vague. For instance, what is age appropriate? What does it mean to developmentally appropriate? What happens if these discussions come up naturally? Even in a college classroom, I've had students come up to me after class and ask me about LGBT issues. So certainly if a college student's doing it, a third grader is going to do it. So again, it's left pretty vague. So in April of 2023, this got expanded to all grades. They really would insist that you don't talk about outside of a sex ed class, which by the way, the parents can opt the child out of the sex ed class. So some kids may just never hear about it in school. So according to Anthony Izaguirre of CBS News, and my apologies if I mispronounced his name, the rule change would ban lessons on sexual orientation and gender identity from grades 4 through 12 unless required by existing state standards or as a part of reproductive health instructions that students can choose not to take. That's the time when students are becoming more aware of their sexuality. So again, as children are becoming aware of their sexuality, schools can't talk about it. So it's up to the parents whether or not they want to discuss sexuality or not. Now, what do proponents of the bill say? Because I want to be fair to everybody involved in this. Well, proponents say this is about parents' rights. Parent right to have a say in their child's education. So Governor Ron DeSantis states, the bill is about parental rights, and parents have the right to make education and health decisions for their children. Okay, so again, we can certainly see that in some cases where that would be appropriate. But again, he believes that parents don't want to discuss sexual orientation. They have that right. So it's about the parents' right to kind of monitor what their children do and do not learn. But teachers have a concern. Ron DeSantis is not the one that has to deal with the repercussions in the classroom. Neither do most of these Florida senators, if any of them. I don't know how many are teachers, so I'm not gonna make a blanket statement if I don't have everyone's job in front of me. But again, they don't have to face the consequences of this. So Paula Stevens, first grade teacher at Eisenhower Elementary School in Clearwater, Florida, states, it makes me wonder, when I talk about families in my classroom, am I going to be violating this law because the children were having discussions about what their family looks like? So again, I use the example of I'm a lesbian. If I were to marry a woman and adopt a child, what if it was time to draw a family picture and my child drew me and mommy together? What kind of discussion would hoist from that? Or would it be, well, just ignore that painting and we'll just move on to something else? Again, how are you going to answer these questions? And it could further confuse children. What's the problem with LGBT issues? What's the problem with two mommies? Again, as children go into middle and high school, why am I feeling this sexual orientation? What does this all mean? So this really has caused some teachers to be concerned. Are they going to be persecuted? Are they going to get in trouble for mentioning LGBTQ issues? Now, some argue this fear is overblown, but is it? Because there's a controversy as to whether or not a teacher's already been targeted. So Jenna Barbie, a 5th grade teacher, showed a Disney film entitled Stranger Worlds. Her thing was it talks about ecosystems. It talks about exploring the world, this alien planet. But there is a plot where there is a boy who has a crush on another boy. So there's an LGBT character. Well, what happened is there's a daughter of a school board member in the classroom. Yeah, I can see that some of you know where this is going. And the school board member did not appreciate showing this film and made a ruckus over it. So this caused Miss Barbie to be suspended and under investigation for violating this rule. So she argues these students are talking about things way beyond this movie. This door that she's talking about, it's been open. These are common conversations that I have to tell my students. Whoa there, we're getting a little too much here. Think about it. On TV shows, people are seeing more LGBT characters. A show on Nickelodeon called The Loud House, aimed at children. And one of the characters has 2 dads. So certainly I could see a parent banning The Loud House. But again, it's going to come up. And now teachers are afraid to talk about it. It also caused confusion with her students. So Miss Barbie continues, all my students are asking, why is that so wrong? Why is it inappropriate? Why are you in so much trouble because of this little part of the movie? And I have to just keep saying, no, go ask your parents about it. So again, not even allowed to defend herself. So she continues, I was never trying to indoctrinate my students by showing them something that had differences and diversity. I was showing them a movie that related to our curriculum and our earth, that also taught many valuable life lessons and that also correlate to our Florida best standards. So again, she wanted to talk about the environment. She wanted to talk about ecosystems. I also read somewhere she was unaware that the law had gone into 5th grade. She's a 5th grade teacher. This happened shortly after the expansion. Yeah, and I've kind of heard various sources on that, but I'm pretty sure she was 5th grade. But again, what's going to happen to her remains to be seen. The news sources I found happened around May 16th or so. Don't quote me on the date, but mid-May. We're in June 4th, I believe, is the time of this recording. Okay, good, June 4th. So again, what's going to happen remains to be seen. But certainly a scary time to be a teacher. Certainly hard when you feel like you have to censor yourself. So let's go ahead and move on from Florida to Tennessee, a state just south of Kentucky where I'm from. So in March 2023, Tennessee passed a bill which many argue affects drag shows. So this has to do with adult cabaret and what qualifies as adult cabaret. So according to the bill, defines adult cabaret as an adult cabaret performance means a performance in a location other than an adult cabaret that features topless dancers, go-go dancers, exotic dancers, strippers, male or female impersonators who provide entertainment that appeals to prurient interest or similar entertainers, regardless of whether or not performed for consideration. So again, according to the bill, there's a sexual component to these presentations. So they're accusing drag shows of that. But male and female impersonators, that would include drag queens and kings, along with strippers. So they basically can't perform in a public area or, outside their clubs. So what are the penalties for this? So it continues. 1, it is an offense for a person engaged in adult cabaret performance on a public property or in a location where the adult cabaret performance could be viewed by a person who is not an adult. So if you've ever heard the phrase, save the children, yep, that's what we're going for here. So again, if there's a chance that somebody who's not an adult could be there, then they don't want it performed. So again, either the drag show needs to be away from children, or just don't host a drag show. So I actually was driving around because I had the interstate closed off and we had to go around, which I'm a little late. But as I was driving around, I saw a little poster for Tootsie. You know, Tootsie is a show about a man who impersonates a woman to be part of a soap star. And I love soap operas, so a good movie. Yeah, I haven't seen the Broadway play. I'm half debating on it. But anyway, what about Tootsie? There's a female impersonator in Tootsie. Is Tootsie okay? Could somebody think Tootsie was sexual? Do we have to have IDs to get into Tootsie now? What if there is a child, or a minor, a 17-year-old who wants to go in? So again, what are the consequences of this? A first offense for a violation of subdivision C is a Class A misdemeanor, and a second or subsequent such offense is a Class E felony. So I won't get into what exactly those are because they kind of vary by state. But misdemeanors and felonies certainly doesn't sound like something I'd like on my record. I think we can leave it at that. So proponents say this is meant to protect children from obscenity. But that leaves us the question of why are drag shows seen as sexual? Why are they seen as bad? Well, everything rests on the idea of prurient desires. It's all about the motivation. So according to Constitution Annotated, the government website, it's a really cool government website that takes each side of the Constitution, kind of breaks it down into what the laws say about it. The court defined material appealing to prurient interest as material having a tendency to excite lustful thoughts, and defined prurient interest as a shameful or morbid interest in nudity, sex, or excretion. So again, the idea is strippers, go-go dancers, drag shows are somehow exciting lustful thoughts. So they want to protect minors from these lustful thoughts, engaging in them. Proponent things of them, I'm not quite sure. I'll just admit that. But I do want to get their side of the story because I think it's only fair. So according to Melissa Brown of the Tennessean, however, Bill's supporter Representative Chris Todd, Republican from Madison County, filed the legislation after he fought a public pride drag show in Jackson, Tennessee. Todd at the time called the drag show child abuse, though he said he wasn't aware of the actual content the show would contain. In a House floor debate in February, Todd again suggested the drag show was inherently inappropriate for minors. This is a common sense child safety bill, and I appreciate your support. Now, I actually did read the entire bill out to you. It's actually only about half a page, 3/4 of a page. So if you saw child safety in there, then you will agree with him, and that's cool. So, but again, it's about protecting the children. If you looked at Anita Bryant back in the late 70s, the Save the Children campaign, this is kind of the Anita Bryant call. So drag shows and Save the Children have been tied together for a while. Now, I do want to be fair to the Republican Party because not every Republican agrees with this. There actually is some opposition from within the party. So Melissa Brown continues, at least one Republican in committee also raised questions about potential implication for other types of entertainment, such as professional wrestling and major performing artists. So I went into Tootsie a little bit. We see professional wrestling, they're really rolling around. And sometimes that can get a little raunchy too. So is that gonna go under this? Again, where does it end? So opponents also believe the bill might be redundant. So again, don't we already have these laws? So Gloria Johnson, a Tennessee state Democratic representative from Knoxville, argues, if you're being obscene in front of children, it is already illegal, correct? If you're wearing a lederhosen and being obscene in front of children, you're being arrested, correct? So again, this is redundant. This is just targeting people that shouldn't be targeting. So admittedly, I've been to some drag shows that did get a little raunchy. Nothing I'd argue too inappropriate, but there are jokes made sometimes. But is this every drag show? Again, Todd didn't even see what was in that show that he thought was child abuse. And there are certainly drag shows that have absolutely nothing to do with sex. And I want to talk about that, namely drag queen story time. Now, one thing is that not going to drag shows, not having any drag stars, could separate LGBT youth from their communities. They won't have any LGBT representation, so they won't understand the community. And this is something Drag Show Story Hour talks about. So if you look at their vision statement, we envision a world where kids can learn from LGBTQ+ stories and experiences to love themselves, celebrate the fabulous diversity in their communities, and stand up for what they believe in and each other. So again, it's about creating community. It's about celebrating differences. So again, it's about teaching acceptance. This isn't sexualizing. So I'll just kind of give a little background on what my stake in this is. I didn't have a lot of LGBT representation growing up. I didn't have a lot of LGBT models. And because of the community I grew up in, LGBT issues are not talked about. And if you did talk about them, you were some kind of deviant and it would immediately be shot down. So when I came out, I didn't know what I was doing. And it led to a lot of very questionable decisions. And I tolerated behavior that I should not have tolerated. So really, it is dangerous to go this alone, to not have this representation. It can really lead to some damage. So that's my stake in this. I do think that we need that representation for minors so that they know kind of what this community is. Again, it's about celebrating the community. So most controversially are the laws talking about gender affirming care. Now I'm going to go over these very quickly because A, I don't have all hour. Seth made it clear I really shouldn't be going into mass time. He doesn't like that for some reason. And also because this is really complex. I used to teach biomedical ethics, so this actually goes into a lot of biomedical ethics issues. But I'll just give kind of the down and dirty of what it is. So let's go ahead and move on to Texas. On May 17th, 2023, Texas passed SB 14, which bans gender affirming care. So again, this is probably the one that made the most news because Texas is the most populous state to do this. Other states have done it, but again, I can't focus on every single state that's done it. Focus on Texas. So this bill's about 7-8 pages long, so I'm not going to read it out to you. But it opens by saying, the Child Health Plan may not provide coverage for services prohibited by Section 161.702 that are intended to transition a child's biological sex as determined by the child's sex organs, chromosomes, and endogenous profiles. There are going to be a lot of medical terms, and even though I taught biomedical ethics, I did not teach biomedical ethics pronunciation. So you can ask my students and they will say, yeah, she kind of botches things. So I apologize right now if I botch it. So what it does is it prevents doctors from performing sterilizing procedures on people under 18. To include hysterectomies, vasectomies, penectomy, or vaginoplasty. Which, for the record, these tend to happen later on in the gender transition. Most of the time, they really are late adolescence, early adulthood when this happens. But it goes on. Other things prohibited by the law include a puberty suppression or blocking prescription drugs to stop or delay normal puberty, supraphysiologic doses of testosterone to females, or supraphysiologic doses of estrogen to males, or remove any otherwise healthy or non-diseased body part or tissue. So again, no hormone blocking drugs, no drugs that would give somebody the sexual characteristics of somebody whose gender they were not identified with on birth, and no sterilizing procedures. It says if a minor is already on this drug, they need to be weaned off of them. Now what this looks like, I'm not entirely sure. Actually, doctors are kind of debating this right now. Most of them are kind of procrastinating. I think that's kind of the consensus right now. But again, certainly an issue. So this has caused no shortage of controversy. So according to Francesca Paris of the New York Times, Republican state legislators have called gender-affirming care experimental and harmful, and say that children are not mature enough to make permanent decisions. So again, this idea is they're making a life-altering decision, sometimes fairly young, like 8, 9 years old. They'll say, hey, I don't feel like I'm the gender I was born with. Now, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I find this debate interesting because this is really a big issue in biomedical ethics outside of this. If you really want to see it in its, I guess you could say, purest form, there was a debate during the pandemic where minors were receiving the vaccine despite their anti-vaxxer parents' protest. There was a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old who were trying to get the vaccine. And it was argued that no, they're minors, they can't consent to this medical procedure. So this actually comes up other places in biomedical ethics. I'd love to maybe do a presentation on this later, minors in healthcare, because it really is fascinating. But again, we don't quite have time to do it today. But again, just to kind of, mirror it. And again, do parents have a right to say, no, we can't do this? Should doctors be allowed to do this if the person is a minor? And how necessary is this? Well, trans activists say it's very necessary, especially for the minor's mental health. So according to Diana Tordoff, a PhD graduate of the Department of Epidemiology out of the University of Washington, it's not just about accessing care. It's about accessing it in a timely fashion. Delays in prescribing puberty hormones or blockers may in fact worsen mental health symptoms for trans young people. So again, just kind of imagine this, that you're in a body that's transforming in ways you don't want it to transform in. And it's every day and you can't stop it. Sounds like the stuff of nightmares. Would probably really affect you. So this is kind of what Kate Stringer from the Washington University School of Public Health says. Youth who initiated care but hadn't received hormones or puberty blockers by 3 to 6 months after their first medical appointment were 2 to 3 times more likely to experience depression and suicidality compared to the start of their care, researchers reported. Benefits are also time-sensitive. In a sample of trans adults, access to gender-affirming care in adolescence is associated with lower odds of suicidal ideation as compared to initiating the same care in adulthood, according to a 2022 study in PLOS One. So again, it's about mental health. It's about preventing suicidal ideation. Now again, I understand this is a much more complex debate than what I've given. I just wanted to give an overview of this. So kind of keep that in mind. Again, as I stated earlier, this presentation is a beginning point, not an ending point. So it could be life and death, though, for transgendered youth. For trans youth, not getting this gender-affirming care can lead to terrible mental health issues. And really, if you look at all these bills, they're putting a strain on LGBT individuals. They're making us feel like second-class citizens, making us feel dirty, turning us into criminals. So this really takes a toll on the mental health of the entire community. So the Trevor Project states 45% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. So they continue, nearly 1 in 5 transgendered and non-binary youth attempted suicide, and LGBTQ youth of color reported higher rates than their white peers. So again, this is a mental health issue. We could really be saving lives by reevaluating some things. So I painted a bleak picture. What can we do? We're not helpless. And that's the great news. We can do things. So the Trevor Project does state LGBTQ youth who live in a community that is accepting of LGBTQ people reported significantly lower rates of attempting suicide than those who do not. So that's our first step, creating a loving community. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we stand up for LGBT rights. We stand up to these laws. Perhaps, if it ever comes to Wisconsin, writing our legislators, perhaps drawing awareness of these issues in whatever way we can. If you see somebody being awful to LGBT people, call them out on it in love. Again, you don't need to use fists, you don't need to be a jerk about it, but call them out. So we can also stand up for LGBTQ youth. You know, a youth who's LGBTQ. Just be somebody they can talk to. And I'd argue St. Paul does this beautifully. We're marching in the Pride Parade this afternoon. Unfortunately, I cannot join you because I have a heart problem, and being out in the heat and marching really isn't always the best idea for me. But kudos to all of you who are going to be in it. So a huge round of applause for me. And really, this parish is very affirming. I'm here because it is so LGBTQ affirming. I've always felt welcome here, always felt free to be myself. And you have no idea what a relief that is to find in a parish. So again, we're doing a great job, but again, we got to keep up the good work. We can't just coast on this. So we can also do research into these issues. All of the bills I've mentioned are publicly available online. So when you see these bills being passed, read them. Even the Texas bill is no longer than 10 pages long. Now, I will tell you, in a debate, there's nothing worse than debating something and somebody said, yeah, but did you know the bill actually said this? Gets you flat-footed every time. So read the bill so you know exactly what it says, so you won't be thrown off. So we can also listen to LGBTQ voices, and if we're LGBTQ, put our experiences out there. Make sure people don't feel alone. Consider donating time and money to LGBTQ charities. There are certain ones I'm passionate about, which I don't want this to turn into a commercial for any of them, but just research, they're out there. And remember also to remember the little things. Treat others with kindness. You all are fabulous. Keep being your fabulous selves. And as always, live in love. Thank you.